On May 2, 1945, in the foothills of the Alps, shrouded in the damp mist of a fading spring, a scene unfolded that would define the next century. A young man on a bicycle, pedaling frantically along a broken road, approached an outpost of the 44th Infantry Division of the United States of America. His appearance foretold nothing heroic. He looked haggard and frightened, but the words he uttered in broken English immediately transformed the American soldier's relaxation into extreme concentration. Magnus von Braun announced that his brother Wernher, the creator of the Third Reich's most advanced weapon, was nearby and ready to surrender with his team. At that moment, on that dusty road, more than just the fate of a group of engineers was being decided. It was the outcome of the struggle for technological dominance in space. Wernher von Braun, a man whose name would soon become synonymous with the lunar program, consciously chose a side, understanding that his mind was the most valuable trophy of this war. He knew that a hunt for his knowledge had already begun, one without rules, where the sole criterion for success would be speed. By then, the V-2 ballistic missile had already left its deep mark on human history, becoming the first man-made object to cross the conventional boundary of the atmosphere and enter outer space. It was a technical marvel, born in the depths of the Peenemünde Research Center, where hundreds of brilliant minds worked to create a device capable of traversing hundreds of kilometers in a matter of minutes. For the leaders of the two superpowers, the United States of America and the Soviet Union, it became clear that whoever mastered the secrets of these missiles would gain the key not only to world domination, but also to the stars. Germany lay in ruins. Its industrial potential was practically nullified, yet its intellectual capital remained intact, hidden in deep mines, forests, and secret archives. The search for German specialists became a complex chess game, where pieces moved across the map of Europe at incredible speed, and the price of an error was the loss of decades of technological progress. The situation was complicated by the fact that the main production facilities for V-2 rockets were located in Thuringia, at the massive underground Mittelwerk factory. According to preliminary agreements among the Allies, this territory was to fall into the Soviet Union's sphere of influence. American military and intelligence agencies had critically little time to implement a plan to evacuate the most valuable equipment and personnel before Soviet soldiers set foot on these lands. The operation, codenamed Paperclip, became one of the largest and most secret intellectual property transfers in history. The task was crystal clear: to take everything that could fly and everyone who knew how to make it fly. The Americans acted with the methodical precision characteristic of large corporations, compiling blacklists of specialists and preparing transport echelons to carry the fruits of German genius across the ocean. At the same time, in Moscow, the scale of the threat and the opportunities emerging were recognized. Special groups, consisting of engineers in uniform, among whom were such outstanding personalities as Sergei Korolev and Valentin Glushko, were sent to Germany following the advancing units of the Red Army. Their mission was no less ambitious, but the working conditions differed dramatically. If the Americans had almost unlimited resources and pre-prepared lists, Soviet specialists often arrived at the scene only after their competitors had already worked there. The hunt for brains turned into a race on the trails, where every found drawing or engine fragment was valued as gold. The Soviet leadership understood that without German technologies, a breakthrough in rocket science would require colossal human and time costs, which the country, having just completed the most difficult confrontation, simply did not have. The main clash of interests occurred around the personality of Wernher von Braun himself. He was not just an engineer, but a charismatic leader, capable of uniting thousands of specialists around him and directing their energy to solve tasks that seemed impossible. His evacuation from Peenemünde to southern Germany in the last months of the war was carefully planned by himself. Von Braun understood that his value as a specialist would protect him from any political persecution if he fell into the right hands. He consciously avoided meetings with Soviet intelligence groups, betting on American capabilities and their financial power. Von Braun's group hid thousands of pages of technical documentation in abandoned salt mines, planning to use them as a bargaining chip in negotiations with representatives of the United States of America. This was a calculated move by a player who understood that the future is built not on ideologies, but on technologies. When American units entered the Mittelwerk factory, they saw a sight that struck the imagination. Endless rows of rocket bodies ready for assembly, and complex machines stretching deep into the mountain for many kilometers. The command decided to act immediately. Within a few weeks, hundreds of freight cars, filled to the brim with components of V-2 rockets, gyroscopes, turbopumps, and measuring equipment, headed towards the ports of Western Europe. About 100 finished rockets and thousands of components were removed, which later became the basis for the first American ballistic programs. Soviet representatives, who arrived in Thuringia according to the terms of the territorial division, received only empty workshops, destroyed test stands, and those specialists who, for one reason or another, could not or did not want to go west. This was a difficult beginning for the Soviet rocket program. Sergei Korolev, recently released and appointed head of one of the groups, faced a situation where he had to painstakingly reconstruct complex technological chains. He had to work with ordinary technicians and middle-level engineers such as Helmut Grottrup, who, although talented, did not possess the systemic vision that von Braun had. Korolev showed incredible perseverance, literally forcing subordinates to gather information from scraps of documents found in trash cans and basements. It was during this period that the foundation was laid for what would later be called the Soviet space miracle, the ability to create perfect systems in conditions of acute shortage of resources and information. While von Braun settled into comfortable conditions at the White Sands Proving Ground, Korolev, in cold German hangars, tried to understand the logic of German designers in order to surpass it. The internal conflict of the main characters in this drama deserves special attention. Wernher von Braun, throughout his career in Germany, balanced on the edge between scientific curiosity and serving the interests of the regime. His dream had always been to fly to the moon, but the means to achieve this dream were rockets designed to destroy cities. Upon arriving in America, he faced initial distrust from the military and the public. His past was carefully concealed or retouched as part of Operation Paperclip, so that public opinion would not hinder the use of his talent. Von Braun had to show extraordinary patience, working in secondary roles in the first post-war years, when the American government had not yet fully realized the priority of space research over conventional weapons. For Sergei Korolev, the situation was mirrored. His personal motivation was fueled by years of hardship and a strong desire to prove that Soviet science could compete on equal terms with the best minds of the West. He did not just copy German developments, he sought to understand their weaknesses. Korolev quickly realized that the V-2, for all its genius, was a dead end for truly powerful space launch vehicles. His internal conflict lay in the need to follow state directives for the precise reproduction of German technology, while his intuition suggested a path to creating fundamentally new engines and control systems. This struggle for the right to independent creativity became defining for his entire life. The clash of ideas in this battle for the mind was philosophical in nature. On one side was an approach based on the superiority of resources and the attraction of ready-made talents. The United States of America bet on integrating German experience into its system, believing that purchased intelligence would ensure its leadership. On the other hand, the Soviet Union was forced to mobilize its own forces and synthesize foreign ideas with the National Engineering School. It was a confrontation between a system of adaptation and a system of breakthrough. The paradox was that it was precisely the absence of key German figures that forced Soviet science to develop more intensively, to seek unconventional solutions, and ultimately to create the Semyorka rocket, which for many years surpassed American counterparts in terms of payload capacity and reliability. A key turning point in this story occurred in the mid-50s of the 20th century, when the Cold War entered a phase of open technological competition. The Americans, reassured by having von Braun's team at their disposal, moved methodically and not too hastily, distributing orders among various branches of the military and private corporations. The Soviet Union, under Korolov's leadership, acted as a single fist. When in October 1957, the whole world heard the signals of the first artificial Earth satellite, it was a shock to the Western world. It turned out that the mere presence of Wernher von Braun does not guarantee automatic victory if the management and decision-making system turns out to be unwieldy. This moment was Korolov's triumph, who was able to create something that overturned human understanding of possibilities from fragments of German technology and his own genius. The reaction in the United States of America was instantaneous. All bureaucratic obstacles before von Braun were removed. He was finally given carte blanche to create a rocket capable of launching America into space. His Redstone rocket, and then Jupiter-C, became the answer to the Soviet challenge. It was then that the struggle of the mind hunters entered the home stretch, the race to the moon. Von Braun received resources he hadn't dared to dream of even in Peenemünde. He became the media face of American cosmonautics, a hero of Walt Disney's television shows, a man who sold Americans the dream of space while simultaneously building the colossal Saturn V machine. His German team, working in Huntsville, Alabama, became the core of the Marshall Space Flight Center, transforming a provincial town into the world capital of rocketry. Meanwhile, in the Soviet Union, Sergei Korolev worked at the limit of human capabilities. His identity was classified. The world knew him only as the chief designer. Under constant pressure, balancing the demands of the military with his scientific interests, he created a manned program. Yuri Gagarin's flight on April 12, 1961, became the high point of this confrontation. The man who started by inspecting abandoned German test stands sent the first human into space, bypassing a team staffed with the best German specialists. This was a moment of truth, showing that will and organizational talent could compensate for an initial technological lag. The culmination of this great confrontation came in the late 60s. Wernher von Braun was creating his swan song, the giant Saturn V rocket. It was the embodiment of his entire life, the logical conclusion of a path begun in the Baltic dunes. A three-stage monster over 110 meters tall, burning tons of fuel per second, it was the only vehicle capable of delivering humans to the moon. At the same time, Korolev was designing the Soviet analog, the N-1 rocket. However, the country's resources were depleted, and internal competition between various design bureaus tore the industry apart. Sergei Korolov's death in January 1966 was a fateful event for the Soviet lunar program. Without his iron will and authority, the project began to falter, and a series of unsuccessful N-1 launches ultimately led to the program's cancellation. On July 21, 1969, when Neil Armstrong took his first step on the lunar surface, Wernher von Braun stood in the Mission Control Center, realizing that his personal mission was accomplished. The hunt for his mind, begun by the Americans in '45, had paid off 100-fold. V2 technologies, evolved through decades of trials and errors, had reached another celestial body. This was a victory not only of one country over another, but also of a specific strategy for utilizing intellectual potential. The United States of America was able to integrate foreign genius, providing him with the conditions to realize the boldest ideas, which predetermined the outcome of the lunar race. The significance of this historical episode for the present day is difficult to overestimate. The struggle for Wernher von Braun and the subsequent development of the US and USSR space programs clearly demonstrate that in the modern world, the main resource is not gold, not oil, and not even territory, but human capital and the state's ability to create conditions for its realization. The history of this confrontation teaches us that technological leadership is not eternal and requires constant nourishment with new ideas and bold organizational decisions. We see how important it is to be able to work with the legacy of the past without becoming its hostage, but using it as a springboard for future achievements. The lessons of that time are relevant even today, as the struggle for talent in artificial intelligence, biotechnology, and new energy sources resembles that very hunt for rocket designers. The paradox is that ideas born in conditions of total war and intended for destruction ultimately became the foundation for the peaceful exploration of space, satellite communications, and a global navigation system, without which the life of modern man is unimaginable. This reminds us of the dual nature of scientific and technological progress, which always carries both enormous risks and incredible opportunities. Returning to that scene in the misty Alps in May 1945, we understand that young Magnus von Braun, on his bicycle, was carrying not just a message of surrender, he was carrying the future. At the moment when the American lieutenant accepted the capitulation of the German engineers, a new chapter in the history of civilization began. The choice made by Wernher von Braun and the challenge accepted by Sergei Korolev determined the trajectory of humanity for decades to come. Their invisible duel, which began on the ruins of one empire and ended in the lifeless craters of the moon, remains one of the most captivating narratives in the annals of human intellect. This is a story of how intelligence becomes the main force capable of changing reality, and how true boundaries lie not on land, but at the limits of our imagination and will to knowledge. Today, when we look at the night sky and see the moving dots of satellites or plan missions to Mars, we must remember that all of this began with a desperate search for blueprints in ruined basements, and with the bold decision of a group of people to entrust their talent to those who could give it wings. The great battle for the mind concluded not with the signing of treaties, but with the world becoming different, more interconnected, more transparent, and more aspiring to the heavens. The legacy of those events continues to live in every rocket leaving the launch pad, reminding us that true strength lies in humanity's ability to dream the impossible and find ways to achieve it, no matter how complex and thorny the historical circumstances. Ultimately, all humanity emerged victorious in this grand hunt for intellect. Despite political disagreements and ideological barriers, The knowledge gained and developed by both sides became common property. We learned to build orbital stations, explore distant planets, and peer into the farthest corners of the universe. The impulse that was set in the mid-20th century has not yet been exhausted. The story of Wernher von Braun and Sergei Korolev is a timeless reminder that talent and determination can overcome any obstacles, and the struggle for knowledge is the only battle in which the results justify the effort expended, transforming the destructive energy of the past into the creative force of the future.